Far from easing her ego, all her 5-MeO-DMT experiences had amplified it. Hello my friends of the Psychedelic Renaissance, it's Tom Hatsis, your psychedelic historian, and this is 5-MeO-DMT, Mary Magdalene, and the inflated ego. In the growing movement to mainstream psychedelics, we can sometimes get ahead of ourselves about the possibilities these medicines can provide for both the individual and society. If a trope emerges around psychedelia that jives with our biases, we can sometimes latch onto it without asking too many questions. At the top of that list are tropes like ego death or ego dissolution, the feeling under a high dose of psychedelics as if you have merged with all of reality. Such possibilities give way to the psychedelic aphorism, "We are all one." It's a lovely sentiment and a very good reminder in our ever-fracturing world. Before we get started, if you're into this kind of content, please give this video a like and a share, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon so that you're notified every time I post a new video. Also, it'd be great to link up on Instagram. Find me at Psychedelic Historian. With that out of the way, let's get into it. As seemingly always needed when discussing psychedelics, there is science to back up the ego death theory. Researchers have found that ingesting psilocybin among other psychedelics leads to a major drop in synchronicity in an area of the brain termed the default mode network. Since the default mode network is responsible for our sense of self, a less synchronized default mode network, it is believed, eases our sense of self. This reduction in the self-referential process allows us to see our connection with all of nature. But that is not always the case. For those who suffer from a major depressive disorder, lowering activity in the default mode network can contribute to rumination and self-preoccupation. In other words, depending on the mental makeup of the person, a loosening of the default mode network can lead to either an increase in preoccupation with the self or a decrease in preoccupation with the self. To put it bluntly, ego loss under psychedelics is no guarantee. And for some psychedelic researchers during the 1950s, this reinforcing of the sense of self was actually a positive for those who had low self-esteem. One such researcher who believed that psychedelics inflated the ego was Dr. Charles Savage of the Naval Medical Research Institute. Dr. Savage had conducted a lot of tests with mescaline during the 1940s, so he knew his shit by the time LSD reached America in 1949. Dr. Savage's tests were some of the very first with LSD in the United States, and he had a very different way of understanding how that drug impacted the ego. For Dr. Charles Savage, LSD inflated the ego. So much so that he recommended using LSD for his patients who had low self-esteem. And Dr. Charles Savage was far from the only researcher who noticed this mushrooming of the ego after a psychedelic had been taken. Other researchers like Gene Houston and Robert Masters noticed that in some of their patients, giving them a psychedelic, heightened aggressiveness, bolstered an impression of greater self-confidence, and probably better self-esteem. Or we can look to current psychedelics researcher Gianna Eichenbaum, who demands that her psychedelic experiences be heard. Does demanding an audience fall on the ego loss side of the fence? Which brings me to my theme. I was once in a conversation with a 5-MeO-DMT facilitator. For those of you who, or probably I should say the few of you who are unaware with 5-MeO-DMT, it is the strongest psychedelic on the planet, so much so that some people don't even feel like the word psychedelic does it justice, and instead call it things like the God molecule, as coined by former 5-MeO-DMT facilitator Dr. Martin Ball. I bring up 5-MeO-DMT because a lot of people, both those who have taken it and facilitators, often rave about the ego dissolution that comes from smoking it. And yet, some 5-MeO-DMT facilitators will have some of the biggest egos of any human being you will ever meet. To be perfectly clear, I'm not saying that all 5-MeO-DMT facilitators have massive egos. I know many 5 facilitators, and most of them are really kind and gentle and warm people that very much have their egos in check. However, it's also true that should you find yourself at, let's say, I don't know, a psychedelic conference after party with somebody chewing your ear off, sucking all of the air out of the room, and not allowing anyone else to get a word in edgewise, chances are very good that that guy is a 5-MeO-DMT facilitator. Anyway, a few years ago, I was hanging out with a bunch of 5-MeO-DMT facilitators. They had all just graduated from the same school, when a young woman, one of these newly christened 5-MeO-DMT facilitators, approached me and proceeded to talk about nothing except herself. She told me that she was able to channel Mary Magdalene, who had revealed to her that she was not a sex worker, as popularly believed, but rather a temple prostitute. Interesting, yes, but there is a major problem with that assessment. Historians actually know very little about Mary Magdalene, and the little bit that we do know would suggest that, one, she wasn't a call girl, and definitely she was not a temple prostitute, a position that didn't exist at the time in Judea. For the ancient Hebrews, temple prostitution was the endeavors of those bastard pagans. Surely no Jew would adopt such a position. The idea that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute, temple or otherwise, comes to us not from any actual historical evidence, but rather from misogynist theologians during the Middle Ages who wanted to rewrite Mary Magdalene's importance in the life of Jesus. In other words, to call Mary Magdalene a temple prostitute is simply to reinforce and echo the rampant misogyny of theologians during the Middle Ages. Now, here's why I'm an idiot. I told her all that. She became offended at first, then defensive, and then quickly spiraled into rage. Far from easing her ego, all her 5-MeO-DMT experiences had amplified it. And then, such a swelling was shattered in the face of some pretty basic Judeo-Christian history. Maybe she can channel spirits from the dead. Hey look, I'm open to it. My friends, people that know me, know that I could get really woo-woo sometimes. But wouldn't the ghost of Mary Magdalene know that she was never a prostitute, temple or otherwise? Would not the real Mary Magdalene explain to this young woman that medieval patriarchy, not her autobiography, actually accounts for claims that she was a sex worker? As we move forward in our psychedelic renaissance, let's be sure to tread maybe just a little more lightly. There are still many questions left unanswered about psychedelics, and the paradox is the more we learn about them, the more questions are going to arise because, again, we're talking about the infinite byways of neurochemistry. Claiming ego dissolution as an aspect of the psychedelic experience is not necessarily wrong, it's just way too narrow. As I've said earlier, and I stand by this, I have met many a 5-MeO-DMT facilitator who was not an egomaniac. We are all our own laboratories of hopes, dreams, fears, loves, character traits, the good, the bad, and the ugly. If we believe that psychedelics can only dissolve the ego, which by the way, they absolutely can, I'm not saying that they don't, but if we believe that without appreciating that they can also very much inflate the ego, then, I mean, in my opinion, we are not doing the movement any favors. Well, my friends, that's all I have for you this time, and I'd love to thank you for stopping by. If you're into this kind of content, please give this video a like and a share, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment to let me know what I can do better. And until we meet again, I'm Tom Hatsis, your psychedelic historian, reminding you that you free your mind by using your brain. Peace.